Greetings, my friend. Father Leo here. And today's theme for the sixth Sunday of Ordinary Time, I've been asked to speak about the word liturgy. The word liturgy. And I think it's a very critical point that we understand the purpose of liturgy, what its goal is, and what it is supposed to do for ourselves and our relationship with God. The first thing I want to say, though, is that liturgy does not mean entertainment. On Sundays, people don't come together to be entertained. So what do they come to? Well, I took the trouble to look up what is liturgy. Now here's one of the descriptions. The word liturgy literally means work of the people. Within the Catholic Church, it is used at the public acts of worship that takes place. It is used at all the public acts of worship that take place. So you have not only Mass on Sunday, you have Mass, you have baptisms, confirmations, marriages, and all those different worship services. But the big thing, it's the work of the people. And I'm afraid that a lot of people it's been lost. It includes the rites and rituals that we do together as a church to worship God. To worship God. So I think that's the big thing to keep in mind. Now let's go back for a little history lesson. I'm sure that many of us have seen a picture of the Last Supper. A picture of the Last Supper, where Jesus apparently gathered with his friends, his disciples, and whether he gathered with his friends or not, I'm not sure. And it was the Feast of the Passover, and they were following the ritual that was ancient, with them a long time. But something different at this one. First of all, Jesus washed the feet of all who were present. And in that washing of feet, it was to show that he was a servant of the people of God. So that's number one in liturgy, the washing of feet. We used to do that on Holy Thursday. I don't know if they still do it or not, but it used to be. So the washing of feet. And then, of course, Jesus, at a certain point, he took a piece of bread and said, "This is my body, which will be given up for you. Take and eat." And they did. Then he said, took a chalice of wine. "This is the chalice of my blood, which will be shed for you and for all until the end of time." Now, the big thing to keep in mind is that Jesus meant what he said. It wasn't to be symbolic, it was to be real. To be real. That people were going to feed on him and drink his blood. And every time they would attend what we call the Mass, they would reenact that ritual, that liturgy, and would indeed be fed and nourished, and would be more strongly rooted in who they were as disciples of Jesus. Now, in the early church, we don't know too much about the ritual itself, the liturgy. We do know that at the beginning it was a meal, agape. An agape meal, a love meal, where the early Christians came together in their homes and they had a real meal. A real meal, but also they would talk about the story of Jesus, and you know, the Gospels weren't written yet, but they talked to those, many of them that knew Jesus personally, could talk about his stories and what he taught and what he stood for and what it was to be a disciple. So they talked about it. Agape, a love meal. Then they would have, they would eat a full-fledged meal, and at a certain point in it, they would appoint a leader who would say the words of consecration. So they would come together and they would pick so-and-so and say, I think today he or she could do a good job. And they would be the leader of this whole ceremony. And the agape meal. Now that went on for some time, where the Christian household gathered and celebrated the meal. And of course, whoever they chose to be the leader would speak the words of consecration, and there would be Eucharist, and there would be communion for the people. So this is what they did, and it was a normal kind of thing, and they just, there was no such thing as ordination. No such thing as ordination, because the church wasn't organized yet for that. I really don't know when it got organized enough to come up with ordination. It probably was in the 300s or the 400s. As the church was spreading, there was the presbyters. Presbyters were the leaders who emerged and came from within the community. And they would be the overseers of the community, if you will. They would do the leading, the teaching, and all of that kind of thing. And then, of course, they had a lot of people. There was the main church in the main town, but out from that, there were the other small churches, and they appointed men they called priests and sent them out there as an extension of the bishop to feed the people and teach them. And that's really kind of got the ball rolling for this evolution of liturgy. Of course, we know that once they were co-opted by the Roman Empire, they did indeed become very organized, and they certainly brought forward the notion of pope and bishop and priest, and the outreach to the various Christian communities. I guess you could say that our liturgy has been evolving over those 2,000 years. At one time it was in Greek, then into Latin, and some of us may be young enough to remember when it turned into English. And going back from there, of course, the whole thing of in the 10th century, when the Eastern churches broke off from the Western churches, Orthodox they call them, and you have several rites there. Several rites. The Ukrainian rite, Marian rite, several rites which kept their own language and their own customs and what have you, and a much different kind of liturgy. However, the Latin rite, as we belong to, the Latin rite, eventually the Latin became the language of the church. And that made sense. With the Roman Empire, that Latin be the religion of the church. And they got well established with pope, bishops, and priests. And so the liturgy was moved from there, always being restructured, reconstituted, renovations brought up to date, until the last few hundred years, when it's almost as if it got frozen stiff because of the rules and regulations. And the Council of Trent, the rules and regulations regarding the celebrations of the mysteries of faith were really regulated to the nth degree. And I remember studying to be able to recite at Mass. And honest to God, there were so many different rules, different tones of voices, bowing and scraping. It was unreal. It was unreal. And then Latin, and I remember Bishop Webster and I were sitting on the veranda having a coffee, and he was heading to Rome for a Vatican Council, and he says to me, "Is there any changes in particular you want?" And I said, "Well, Bishop, I only want one. I want the language of worship to be in English." "Oh," he says, "Father Leo, that'll never happen." Well, guess what? It did happen. I wasn't the only one hoping for it. So it changed into English. And it wasn't very well done in the beginning. You know, there was a lot of experimentation, trial and error, until eventually the authorities got it well organized. The new liturgy for the Mass, and the sacraments got it well organized again, and that's what we have today. Now, I have to say this. When I worked for the school board, that would be back in the 80s, I used to meet so many of the young teachers who had quit going to Mass, and I would say to them, "Tell me why, I just like to know." And they said one of the reasons that we quit going was because it was the same old, same old. You could predict what was going to happen. It'd be the same old every Sunday. Second, they said it's boring. It's boring. We just sit in the pew and we don't participate. Just sit in the pew. Sometimes, depending on what parish they're in, some of them would comment on the music. That was old-fashioned. Others would speak about the homily or a sermon that there was no one then. It has nothing to do with the world today. So they had many complaints, many complaints on the liturgy, and the sum total was an awful lot of them quit because they were bored out of their skull. That brings us to today and who we are. We gather here every Sunday. And I remember when we first started it, we gathered in my home. And when I remember one of the first things I said to the people then was, "It's not my Mass. Don't go telling people that you're going to Father Leo's Mass. You're not. It's our Mass. There's a difference. It's ours. And I expect you to take ownership of it. And I expect you to be part of shaping how we'll worship. Because it says very clearly here that it means the work of the people. The work of the people. And I think we've made great progress here. certainly I have to mention the three music ministries who are certainly in the forefront of up-to-date music. Very good, very good. And new music that speaks to people of the 21st century, because we're living in the 21st century and we need to have a liturgy that is that way. Because of our spirituality, creation spirituality, and our focus on the earth, we need to have readings that speak about the earth. In other words, the earth is the first catechism. The earth is the voice of God. We need to hear the voice of God spoken by creation. Spoken by creation. And the earth has plenty of messages that tell us about God and the things of God and life on planet Earth and the oneness and unity. So the earth has a lot to tell us, but we've got to be tuned into the earth. If we're not tuned into the earth, then we're not going to hear what the earth has to tell us, and we're going to miss out on it. So that's a big thing I want to keep in mind. So today, in our meditation time, we will think for a few minutes about how can we participate more fully in the liturgy, make it our own, and make sure it's God-centered. Make sure it is God-centered and keeping us attuned to and included in the life of God. It has to be tune-centered. Needs to be the work of the people, as I said. And it needs to be not entertainment, but at least it needs to be life-giving. And nothing wrong with laughter and all the rest of it. And so that's, I think, a big part of it. And leadership, you know. I won't be here much longer. So when you're baptized priest, prophet, and king. Well, maybe the time is getting close where you're going to have to act like a priest and become a leader in worship. Be a leader in the community who baptizes, confirms, who officiates at wedding and funerals. And maybe not. Maybe you can convert some already people who are ordained priests, that they can be converted to be part of this new kind of work. And but I am challenging right here now today, you've got to take responsibility for the liturgies. You've got to be creative. You've got to experiment. And all of the stuff that you need to do to make it your own, so that it's got your fingerprints all over it. And but never losing sight of its purpose, which is to help you to grow in your love for God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the world in which you live. That must always be the goal, to grow in your love for God and all that God loves. So we'll have, well, I'm going to say we'd have our meditation, but since this is only video, I guess we just sign off and you can think of what I have said and see if it makes any sense to you. God bless.